Pride is a toxic, poisonous sin, and I learned it the hard way. In the year 2000, after the election, I came back to Washington. I was sitting at a desk in a temporary government office building, and my phone rang, and it was Karl Rove. And he said, Tim, I'm calling to change your life. President Bush would like to make you a special assistant to the president and a deputy director of the White House Office of Public Liaison. And I was stunned. And I became a commissioned officer to the president for almost 8 years. And it was the professional ride of a lifetime. I remember being on the street in Washington, D.C., and a woman whom I had never met was standing on the street corner, and she heard me describing to a colleague of mine something that we had done professionally that day. And she turned to me and she said to me, not condescendingly, not critically, but she said to me, "You're a big shot." But I remember internalizing this and thinking, boy, somebody thinks that I'm important. And I've been in Washington long enough to know that pride often takes one of three avenues. In Washington, it becomes sex, power, or money. And that was not my pride. My pride was the one who wanted to write it better than anybody, to express it better than anybody. I love to read, I love to write, I love to speak. And when I was a young man growing up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, we had an afternoon newspaper, which is still there, called the News Sentinel. And one of the editors there contacted me. And he said, you know, I want you to write an occasional column. I know you find interest in so many things. You love tennis. You love to read. You love history. You love jazz and classical music. You love opera. I want you to write about all these things that you love. I don't want you to write about politics. You know, we've got a lot of politics on the page, but I want you to write about those other things. And being able to write about and having a regular or semi-regular outlet of things that I'm very interested in beyond politics was a truly wonderful outlet for me. And by the way, and people always said, you're such a great writer. But pride does not accept being good enough. Pride does not say, whether it's a newspaper column or something else, it doesn't say, that's very well done, that's good, those are the gifts that God has given you. It says, you've got to be the absolute best there ever was. You have to say it better. Or in other instances, you have to make more money. Or you have to, whatever it is. You know, it's not enough to be the governor or the senator or the Congress. You know, everybody's got to be the president of the United States. I mean, this is the nature, and this is the toxicity, and ultimately, this is the hollowness of pride. One of my favorite writers is Mark Twain. And he once quipped that the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between a fire and a firefly. And to a writer who wants to say it better, who wants to express it with more grandeur and with just the right eloquence, if you are a prideful person, as I was, you're always searching, and in my instance, was willing to find and to use other people's words if that would sort of fill the vacuum. And so incrementally, over time, knowing exactly what I was doing, I began to plagiarize some of those columns. And I got wonderful feedback. People really enjoyed reading my columns. So I kept writing this column, and I came back one morning at the White House after breakfast, and I popped open my email, and there was an email from a reporter saying, "Did you plagiarize that column?" And I quite literally fell down next to my desk, and I prayed, oh God," because it was true. I'd like to be able to say that I had a well thought out strategy of what would happen if I got caught. But the fact of the matter is that I didn't. And I think that this is something that people who are arrogant and haughty have in common. That sometimes they're so caught up in it that it obscures their vision. Not just their vision to look forward, but a priori, to look back and to sort of reason. And I have to tell you, as a Christian, I believe that reason and discernment are a gift. Pride obscures vision. And I picked myself up and I sent an email back. And I said, I am guilty as charged. And I did what I consider to be the hardest thing that I've ever done, which is that by the end of that workday, I wrote a letter of resignation to the President of the United States of America. I resigned my position that day, and I literally cowered out of the White House because my entire world had collapsed. Losing a job is a very painful thing. I feel very certain that I inflicted mental anguish upon my wife, upon my children, the people I love most in the world. What made this particularly difficult is that I had a semi-public profile. I was the outreach person to the president for all my fellow Christians. I was the outreach person for the conservative community. I was the outreach person for the veterans groups and the think tanks and public policy groups. The headlines in the paper, after my resignation. Making the ticker tape on Fox News and CNBC and MSNBC and CNN. I mean, wasn't this jolly, George W. Bush's outreach guy for the Christians and the conservatives. I mean, boy, look what he's done. And the fact of the matter is that I was guilty. I put myself on a giant silver platter and offered myself up in the worst possible way. In politics, there's a kind of divorce that takes place. When you embarrass a president or a governor or a senator, you become persona non grata. And I fully expected that's what my fate would be. It's certainly what I deserved. This all happened on a Friday. And I came in on a Monday to begin taking the pictures off the walls and, cleaning out my desk. And I received a call from the chief of staff to the president. And he said the words you never want to hear. He said, "The boss wants to see you." Now, I had been at the White House long enough to know that if it was good news, it was that the president wanted to spend a little time with you. But if it was bad news, it was the boss. And I knew that my proverbial woodshed moment was coming. And I went to the Oval Office, and I went to see the president. And when I got there, I noticed that there was no one else there except for the president and me, and I thought, boy, this is going to be really bad. And I went into the Oval Office and closed the door, and I turned to face the president. And I looked him directly in the eyes, and I said, "Sir," and I began to attempt to apologize. And he looked at me, and he said, "You're forgiven." And I was so stunned that it struck me as a truly surreal moment, as if I really had not heard these words. And I tried to compose myself, and I attempted to apologize a second time. And he said, before I could get the words out, "You know," he said, "grace and mercy are real." He said, "I've known grace and mercy in my life, and I'm extending grace and mercy to you. You're forgiven." And the third time I said, "Sir," I said, "I am so deeply apologetic." I said, "You have given to me the greatest professional honor of a lifetime, and I owe you a categorical apology. I'm sorry, please forgive me." He said, "I want to say a third time, you're forgiven, grace and mercy are real." He said, "Now we can talk about all this, or we can talk about the last 8 years." He said, "I'll let you choose." And he signaled for me to sit down. So I went over to sit on one of the couches in the Oval Office, and he said, No. He said, "I want you to sit in here." And he was pointing toward the chair beneath the famous portrait of George Washington, where the vice president sits, or a head of state, or a VIP, and not a special assistant to the president who is guilty as charged. And I sat down, and we talked about the last 8 years, 2 presidential campaigns, 9/11, and many other things. And we prayed together, and we embraced as I got ready to leave. And I looked around the Oval Office once more, realizing that I had violated, in the most profound sense, everything that I had been taught as a young Lutheran Christian, by parents and by grandparents, by a legion of mentors, professionals, teachers, interns. I really felt that I had violated their trust, and categorically, because I had. And I thought, what have I done? And I barely had 1 foot out of the Oval Office, and the president said, "Oh, and by the way, I want you to bring your wife and children here next week so that I can tell them what a great husband and father you've been." And sure enough, my wife and boys, Tim and Paul, came to the Oval Office the following week. There were lots of hugs. I don't mind saying there were a few tears. The president gave us gifts, and we have become very good friends. No mention of this again. We've been together on a number of occasions in Washington and in Dallas, where he makes his home. The purest sense of grace and mercy and forgiveness, which I know flows from the president's heart as a very sincere Christian, and he is a very sincere Christian. I know that I could never experience this kind of grace personified in any finer form. It was a forgiveness and for me, a pathway toward renewal and regeneration. And it was an extraordinary and a very painful chapter in my life. My life, did not stop on what turned out to be my Good Friday. A really awful day. Looking back, And isn't it true of every life? Looking back, are there things that we would have done differently? Are there things that we would have said differently? Are there things that we would have thought differently? The answer is absolutely yes. And I thought about this question. In the age of Google, our past is always there. Is there not going to be a moment where I can't, with 2 clicks of the mouse, look back and have to relive this? But the beautiful thing is that in the Christian life, there is an antidote to whether it's Google or anything else, which is the way forward. And the way forward is the life in Christ. Because long before there was Google, there was human sin. Long before there was Google, there were a multiplicity of mistakes, willful and unwillful. And if any of us were preoccupied in the Christian life with our past, and if forgiveness was not real, and if redemption were not real, I think it would probably crush us into powder, the weight of our sin. But the beautiful thing is that even in the land of Google, that redemption is real, forgiveness is real, and a tender-hearted Savior took all of that in His person on the cross and died and rose again.